The gate creaked open. The sound cut through the silence like a blade. Inside the wire, hundreds of men turned their heads. Boots crunched on frozen ground. And then, laughter. Not the cruel kind they'd grown used to. Something else, softer, human. He didn't understand it. He hadn't heard laughter like that since before the war, and as the young German soldier raised his head, blinking against the winter sun, he saw them, the Americans. Clean uniforms, food in their hands, and a warmth in their eyes that didn't make sense. He didn't know it yet. But that day, then everything would change. They had taken his name. Now he was just a number. Stalag 9G, prisoner 1147. The camp smelled of rust and smoke. Barbed wire twisted against the sky like black thorns. The wind carried whispers, German, Russian, Polish, all languages of men who no longer belonged anywhere. He slept on straw that never stayed dry. Every night he dreamed of his mother's kitchen. The bread, the sound of rain on the roof. And every morning he woke to boots and barking orders. Fear wasn't an emotion here. It was the air itself. You breathed it in without noticing. Some men cursed the guards. Others prayed. He did neither. He had stopped believing in both God and mercy the day he watched his best friend fall beside him in the Ardennes. They said the Americans were different, that they treated prisoners fairly. But fair was a strange word when your stomach clawed at itself. At night, the men whispered about escape, about home. But he had no home left to return to, only ruins and ghosts. And so he waited, days blending into nights, weeks into silence, until one morning, something changed. It began with a smell, bread, fresh, warm, impossible. He thought it was a dream. But when the guards opened the gate that morning, a group of American soldiers came in, carrying baskets. They weren't shouting. They weren't mocking, just working. One of them, a tall man with calm eyes, set down a basket near the fence. He looked across at the German prisoners, and for a second, their eyes met. The American lifted his hand slightly, a silent gesture. Then he left the bread and walked away. The prisoners stared, frozen. Was it a trick? No one moved. Finally, an old sergeant stepped forward, reached through the wire, and tore off a piece. Steam rose from the crust. Real bread. The German soldier couldn't stop staring at it. He hadn't smelled bread since 1943. He didn't know whether to eat or cry. That night, he couldn't sleep. The image of that American haunted him. Why would an enemy feed him? He told himself it didn't matter, that it was pity or strategy. But somewhere deep inside, a question whispered, if this was kindness, why did it hurt so much? The next day it happened again. The same American brought supplies, blankets this time. When a guard shouted something in English, the man laughed. It wasn't cruel laughter. It was the kind men shared when life still made sense. The German felt his chest tighten. He hated that sound, because it reminded him he was still human enough to miss it. And when the American turned to leave, he dropped something near the fence, a small folded paper. A drawing, a rough sketch of mountains and trees. On the back, a few words in broken German. I fought in Italy. Maybe same mountains. Jack. He stared at it for a long time, then folded it back up and hid it under his shirt. He didn't know it yet. But he had just met his enemy. Days passed. Then weeks, and somehow, the American kept coming. Jack. He wasn't like the others. He didn't look at the prisoners as Germans. He looked at them like men. Sometimes he'd sit near the wire during guard duty and talk softly, half English, half gesture. He'd point at the sky, at the snow, at the trees, trying to find common words. The German soldier, whose name was Karl, slowly began to respond. A nod here, a word there. Jack learned Karl's name. Karl learned that Jack had a brother who died at Bastogne, and Karl had been there too. When he realized that, he froze. His chest went cold. He wanted to tell Jack the truth, that maybe it was his own artillery that had killed his brother, that maybe they were enemies long before this fence. But he couldn't. How could he speak that kind of truth to a man who shared his bread? One afternoon, Jack came with something else and a harmonica. He sat near the wire and played softly. The sound carried through the camp, fragile, almost shy. Men stopped eating. They just listened. Carl felt something break inside him. A memory. His sister dancing in their village square. His father humming. When the song ended, the silence that followed was heavier than any weapon. And for the first time since the war began, Carl cried. Jack saw. He didn't speak. He just nodded, the way men do when words are useless. Later that night, Carl wrote in the corner of an old ration leaflet, "I thought I knew what enemies looked like. But maybe war makes us fight the wrong people." Weeks turned to months. Spring came. The camp changed too, a little less shouting, a little more light. Some men even laughed again. Carl began to draw. Sketches of trees, people, moments. Jack sometimes brought paper. Sometimes nothing. But always the same quiet kindness. Until one day news came. The war was over. Men cheered. Some fell to their knees. Others just stared. Carl felt nothing, because he didn't know what freedom meant anymore. Then Jack appeared at the fence. He smiled, holding a small parcel. Bread, again, but also something else. A photograph. Jack's family, his wife, his little boy. He passed it through the wire. Carl stared at it, his throat tight. Jack said quietly, "Go home. Be better than we were." Carl wanted to answer, but words refused him. So he reached into his pocket, pulled out the folded sketch Jack had given him months before, now faded and worn, and handed it back. Jack shook his head. "No, keep it." And then he did something Carl would never forget. He opened the gate. For the first time, the wire that separated them meant nothing. They didn't shake hands. They didn't need to. They just stood there. Two soldiers who had fought on opposite sides of hell, bound by something greater than victory. A moment later, Jack turned and walked away. Carl never saw him again. Years later, when Carl was an old man, he lived in a quiet town in southern Germany. He kept a small box under his bed, letters, drawings, and one faded sketch of mountains and trees. Every Sunday he'd take it out and look at it in silence. His grandchildren once asked him, "Opa, were the Americans cruel?" He smiled softly. "No," he said. "They were human." Sometimes he would walk to the hill behind his house and sit beneath the oak tree. He'd watch the sun fall over the fields, the same color as the bread he once shared with his enemy, and he'd whisper to himself, "War took everything from me, but humanity gave it back." Then he'd close his eyes and listen. In the distance, he could almost hear a harmonica, soft, fading, but still playing. History remembers battles, but men remember faces, the ones who spared them, the ones who forgave them. And somewhere, in the ruins of 1945, two soldiers discovered something stronger than any army, the simple power of mercy. Because sometimes, you don't win a war by defeating your enemy. You win it by seeing yourself in him. War took everything, but humanity gave it back.